Now, I don't actually know how much of the audio is going to be picked up and if it is going to be peaking or not, but this is my first time recording with this mic, so let's just see how that works out. Now, the audio might be a bit different, and I mean, you probably already figured out why. It's because I'm not at my apartment. Yeah, I'm in Brazil. Currently staying at an Airbnb. I will continue staying at this Airbnb for the next few weeks, and that means that most of the videos will be filmed either at this Airbnb or outside doing things. I recently decided that I would pick up French again after I returned to Norway from my trip to Brazil. That got me thinking of what are the things that I should concern about when learning two languages at once, because I mean, I'm not going to be stopping my Portuguese. I'm probably going to be focusing a bit less on it, but I still want to make progress, and just to not feel overwhelmed, I figured, yeah, I have to make some plans, and I figured I could probably show you what I'm considering when making plans for starting to learn a second language at the same time. Now, learning a language, it can be divided into several parts. I like to divide it into 4 parts. That is listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Now, when you're learning 2 languages, that means that essentially you have 8 parts, because you have all of the 4 categories, but you have them in both languages. Now, I would recommend, and this is what I'm going to be doing, to not take on too many parts each day, because I mean, essentially you have to practice all 4 parts when you start learning a language, because otherwise you won't be able to use the language that well. And I mean, everything is part of your language proficiency. But I mean, if you are learning 2 languages, or I know some people are crazy enough to learn like 5 or 6 languages at the same time, you can't go through every single part every single day, because that would just take up too much time. Or you would be left with like 5 minutes of studying time with each part. Let's say that you have an hour to study. I mean, divide that by 8 parts. That means you have slightly more than 7 minutes of studying with each part. You can't do that. You wouldn't be able to progress much. Instead, what I would do is, first of all, I mean, I wouldn't do this if I was super pressed for time. But if I have a bit of free time, I would still not try to do everything every single day. But I would still make sure that, okay, I studied a significant amount of time, like enough for me to make progress in one part, and I would probably continue doing like 3 or 4 parts. That means just mixing and matching, but still I wouldn't recommend doing more parts than that. Now, one thing to remember is that progress, if you're learning 2 languages, like I will probably figure this out for myself, but if you're learning more than 1 language, then yeah, progress will be slower, because you won't have a chance to focus too much on 1 language, and it's just more new things coming in, and it takes more time for your brain to get used to everything. Now, one thing that you can be tempted to do when you're studying more than 1 language and you notice that things are slowing down is that you can try to do even more. Now, I wouldn't recommend this, because it's essentially just going to leave you feeling overwhelmed. Try to still keep it like something that you can keep it manageable, and then continue on at a pace that feels right for you. One thing that I would consider when trying to schedule like what parts you're going to be doing is that I wouldn't do speaking in both languages. This is just because, I mean, when you're speaking in a foreign language, you end up using your mouth in a way that you're often not used to, and that can be very tiring. And if you do that for too long, then yeah, obviously you're going to be sloppy. But then try, like, if you then were to try to jump over to another language, your mouth would be too tired and you wouldn't be able to properly focus on speaking and pronouncing every word correctly. So try to do speaking practice in 1 language per day, not mix them. Another thing is I wouldn't study 2 languages where I was at the same level, especially not if they're similar, because I mean, you would just end up being confused. Let's say that you were starting, for instance, 2 languages at the same time. You would most likely end up starting both languages at like learning the same things. But if you're learning one thing, especially if you're, for instance, doing more than one Latin language, then these things are likely to be similar. And if you're trying to learn both things at the same time, then yeah, you're likely to mix them up. Instead, if you already have a good grasp on one concept in one of the languages, then you can focus on how they're different or how they're similar and use that to sort of help you remember the new language. That seems a lot easier in my mind. Now, this isn't actually as important if you're learning, like let's say that you're, for instance, learning English and you're learning Japanese. These languages aren't similar, meaning that you're less likely to be confused, but especially if you're learning languages that are similar and you're going through, for instance, vocabulary lists, you're learning verbs, everything like that, you're likely to get confused if you're doing both at the same time. Here's what my language learning is going to be looking like. I'm probably mostly going to be maintaining my Portuguese, but I will still be reading a bit, and of course I still have my girlfriend that I'm talking to, like both writing and speaking, and I might end up watching the occasional movie or series in Portuguese. But other than that, I will probably be doing most of my practicing in French. I should still be able to make time for about 5 hours of studying. What I meant to say was 1.5 hours. How that ended up with 5 hours, I'm not quite sure. 1.5 hours of studying per day. That, for me, is comfortable, it's manageable, but if it isn't for you, then don't try to do that much. And as always, best of luck with your studies. I hope you found this video helpful, and neck out.